biased on that, just full disclosure, because I'm the one who discovered that, but nonetheless, most of my colleagues seem convinced that I'm right, so I'm going to go with that. Why not? If nothing else, the physics of it work, which means from a creature design standpoint, it works. Well, one cool thing to keep in mind too is sometimes ideas that turn out not to pan out in biology, like hypotheses did pan out, that could have been true, like they were plausible in the physics work, that just turned out it's something else, can still be good inspiration for creature design, because if you're imagining it, it doesn't have to be something that actually exists. It could be something that just could exist. If it does exist, you know it can exist. But in sometimes the failed ideas too. There's a crazy thing called Longisquama, and Terrell's put that in our upcoming book, which is great. It was once thought to be a glider with all these weird, like multi-long scale wing projections coming off its body. And now it looks like those weren't actually wings and couldn't fly. The reason why there was a thought that they might do that is if you put them in the right position, it would work. So we included it in the book because it's like, well, actually, this is still this idea is still a fantastic source of inspiration for a cool, very different, very wacky, imagined creature, and it's realistic because it would technically work. It turned out not to be the thing that the animal did. It turns out the anatomy is different than we thought, but it still works. In any case, we think that, though, that pterosaurs were actually quad launchers, and so one of the things we've done with this critter is blended it with pterosaur anatomy. That means, for one thing, making it more front heavy. So the head's really big, the neck's really robust, the chest is extra robust, the pelvis and hind limbs are relatively small. The reason why that helps it get big is this. This is actually what stops birds from getting bigger and be able to fly. Birds can. If you're a quad launcher, you're using your chest muscles for both takeoff by jumping off your arms and for flight. So that motor gets used for everything. So if you make that motor bigger, your flight gets stronger and your takeoff gets stronger. But your hind limbs, they can help you in launch, but they don't help you in flight. So if they're really big, you're just carrying them around as payload. This is a classic dragon design problem, right? You have really big legs, and that might actually help it jump and get into the air, but now it's carrying them around as payload, and you can also get a really bad center of mass issue, which we'll talk about in a second as well, and you get all kinds of pitching things going on. So actually, the most robust limbs to get really big and fly, the limbs that are really strong, the strongest limbs you got, the biggest bones and biggest muscles should be the ones that you use for both takeoff and flight. Birds actually get stuck because they use two different motors for two different things. Their legs are basically everything for takeoff, and the wings are everything for flight. So they have to push their wings into the air with their legs, and they have to carry their legs through the air with their wings. And that's why about the biggest that a bird can get and still fly would be about 75 kilos. We don't have any that big alive today, but there is one in the fossil record that seems to be about pushing the limit. By contrast, the largest pterosaurs, which appear to have been flight capable, all the math says they're flight capable, all the anatomy says they're flight capable, the locations where we find them also suggest they're flight capable. We find them on some pretty remote locations. Those guys are probably pushing 600 to 700 pounds. They were about the height of a living Maasai giraffe. They had wingspans of about 35 feet and heads that were about twice the length of the head on the largest Tyrannosaurus rex specimen to date. They had heads of around 3.5 meters in length, so 3 yards, about 12. Just the skull's about 9 to 12 feet long.
That's awesome.
This is what I play with for a living. I get paid to play with those animals. I just want to point that out. This is why I'm such a happy human being. Any case, so we have Terrell's done a wonderful little sketch of a pterosaur with proper proportions there next to the creature she's working on, so you can see the inspiration. And they are basically giant flying motor heads, very flat-loaded animals. That actually is useful in a couple of ways. One way it's useful is, of course, the bigger the jaws, the bigger the thing to eat you with. But there are other fun things about that too. It moves the center of mass forward. That actually forces the animal to forward sweep the wings. Notice how far forward the center of the wings are, okay, or Terrell's put it there? That's on purpose. But the center of lift is not actually at the center of the wing, it's not at the center of the area, it's about a quarter way back from the front edge. Okay, so close to the front edge, the front of the wing has to be aligned with wherever the center of mass, the center of gravity is for the animal. But that forward sweep on the wing is actually really useful. It makes it harder for the wing to stall, particularly if you're a big animal. That's really useful because landing and takeoff is a real problem. Landing, they're heavy, process more slowly before it's sweet. That's one reason why pterosaurs may have been so front-loaded. But the other thing, of course, is it's front-loaded in terms of the chest, just like the pterosaur is, because those legs help kind of initiate the vault or take off, but then the arms doing most of the work, and then they continue to most of the work in flight, so it's getting double duty from its biggest muscles. That lets it be extra big, extra strong, all the good things. But this thing is very much a giant flying riverhead as well, and very literally so. So in terms of sort of some of the other kind of cool bits of anatomy, those giant incisors and canines, those are directly out of real vampire bats. For those who are not familiar with real living vampire bats, there's a few species of them, actually probably more than a few, it turns out, under revision now. But the common vampire bat is Desmodus rotundus. It's Central and South American in origin, and it has these big blade-like incisors and canines, and it has no other teeth. It has no premolars or molars. Why would it eat them? It doesn't chew it, only eats blood. All it eats is fluid. What they do is they make a little wound, it starts to bleed, they have an anticoagulant in their saliva. That anticoagulant is called Draculin. Awesome. Ounce for ounce, it's one of the strongest anticoagulants in the world. It is, I think, 3 times stronger than heparin. So it evolved something better than what we could synthesize. And so it just keeps bleeding, and it laps it up with the tongue. But on our critter here, at that size with a head 3 meters long, this big, monstrous, running, catapulting, flying creature, when it goes to take a chunk out of something and it's looking for blood, it's also going to get a pound of flesh. So we gave it some slicing molars on there as well, molars, kind of like carnassials on a cat.
Would you love to be a mammoth living back then with this animal?
Yeah, it takes a whole cookie cutter out of you and just guzzles from maybe it goes for the neck, the thing just drops, it just drinks from the carotids for the minute that it's still pumping. So
assuming your creature here, if it was like just a blood eater and it's adapted to that, but if it has like the teeth and it's going to be eating flesh, you have to figure that into like after if it's going to kill something, how it's going to affect its flight or its takeoff. Or would that affect it, even a vampire? If that was a vampire bat that was eating a goodly amount of flesh, would it still be able to take off? Or
they can. Well, that's why vampires are such powerful takeoff. So powerful to take off. But most bats have no need to be that strong to take off. Especially from the ground. Vampires spend a lot of time on the ground because they feed on the ground. Because they tend to feed it from like right above the hoof on big mammals. And so they scramble on the ground and they blow up like a water balloon. Because the only problem with blood, it's already pre-digested for you. How convenient. So they have a really short GI tract. They have the shortest GI tract of any living mammal. It's like almost nothing. It's just like a little squiggle. It's like not all this cool intestine and everything. It's like, that's it. Esophagus into a tiny little stomach. It just absorbs immediately. But it's great. It's already pre-digested. It's got everything you need. Complete diet. The only problem with it, it's mostly water by volume, and water's heavy. So they're actually quite heavy relative to the wing area where they take off. And it turns out that's the ratio that really determines how hard you have to push to take off. Big things have a hard time taking off because on average they have more weight per wing area. But now you have a little thing that's basically physically a big thing for takeoff, so they can still manage it. Now they have another trick though too. They may have the smallest GI tract for any mammal, but they have the biggest kidneys. Because what they can do is pass a lot of that water really quick. So Desmodus doesn't produce much in the way of fecal matter, but it produces a lot of urine. But it's not. It's almost just straight water. I mean, they basically just they're so overhydrated they actually want to dump most of the water. So what they do is they're eating. They're actually passing water as they eat, just shoveling it through as much as they can to dump as much of that weight, and then off it goes.
What kind of tongue is it out? Curious.
Tongues?
Yeah, blood
they're sort of like a dog tongue, because that's kind of how they lap up the blood. It's kind of like, but they've got even more pits in them, so they've got more cohesion, so it really sticks, and they're pulling big droplets of blood. So you can kind of imagine a dog doing the same thing, but instead of scooping a little bolus of water, it gets like a big bolus every time.
Okay. I'm just curious, because like so many of them are like your traditional snake tongue, your long skinny tongue, but
yeah.
If you got a blood eater, they're not.
No. They've got like a cat or dog like tongue that's got extra pits in it, so it sticks to the blood, and then they can kind of scoop the blood in. The longest tongue relative to body size on I think any animal at all living is now is also a bat. It's a nectar-feeding bat, and it has this incredibly long tongue that comes down and wraps into his chest. and it shoots the tongue all the way down because it feeds food from flowers that are really long. The flowers are like as long as it is, the nectar's all the way to the bottom. It's going to shoot the tongue on the bottom. So that's if you're looking for a long tongue critter, look for things that eat nectar. That's what hummingbirds do too. Actually, put a hummingbird feeder, get really close. I have a hummingbird feeder at home. I love watching them. They get close. And you watch them feed, what you'll see is their throat is pumping. That's because the tongue's attached, for those of you now, the tongue is ultimately attached down to your hyoid bone. And so what's happening is the muscles of the hyoid are moving back and forth because the tongue's attached to it. So what you see in here, they're not drinking like we're drinking. Their throat's moving because their tongue's shooting in and out. And it shoots in and out like a few dozen times a second.
I should ask, what is this big?
I'm sorry?
What is this big and it's hunting such big prey? Would it not have any echolocation or would it find slightly better?
Well, that's a good question. So you can do a couple things with it. We've kept the kind of small eyes and kind of the idea of the echolocation, but the trick would be then you have to give it some novel biology for how it produces such high-pitched sounds at such large size. That said, it also wouldn't need to be as ultrasonic or even truly ultrasonic compared to a small bat. The resolution you get from anything, be it light or sound or anything, the smallest thing you can see is half the wavelength you're using. That's why the pitch is so high on insect-eating bats, because they're trying to see tiny little insects. So the wavelength can be no more than twice the length of the insect that they're trying to see. So well, basically, see by hearing. If you're hunting mammoths, all you need to basically do, you're basically just using echolocation, maybe to sneak up on them at night, make sure you don't hit a tree. So you could potentially, you can imagine this thing might actually make audible screeches that it could echolocate with, which would just be terrifying. Particularly because high-pitched sounds can be hard to specifically locate. So you could hear it, but you wouldn't know exactly where it was. And of course, if you're a big mammoth and you have low-frequency hearing, you might not be able to hear it. So everything else scatters, and you'll wonder, why did everyone run? I didn't hear it or anything. Oh, my jugular. But yeah, that's the kind of thing you totally play with. I was actually thinking about that as well, thinking, it might make more sense for it to have big eyes and not be echolocator. But we like the look, we kept it, and you can create a backstory for that too, just like I did. But you can create a perfectly reasonable, plausible alternative backstory where it's not an echolocator because it's so big. Do whatever you want.
Put in like all the little animals running away, and it's part of your scenery, and he's just like looking.
It'd be fun, yeah. The largest bats alive today do not echolocate, but they also eat fruit, which doesn't run away. So, and they tend to feed a lot at dawn and dusk rather than the middle of the night as well, so they actually have some light in their life. But they're super cute and fun. I like flying foxes.
We have some beautiful flock of gigantor flying foxes at the Oakland Zoo, and they're just fascinating to watch. They're so often a watch. And it's like, and they jiggle their thumbs and it's like.
And their little faces are adorable. Oh, they're fantastic. Incidentally, going to a great zoo that has flying foxes and watching them launch is a really good opportunity to see that slingshot I was talking about in action. They're slow enough because they're big enough you can actually see it a little bit, and what you can really see is the recoil on the perch. If they're on a branch that's thin enough, because they're pulling on it to do the slingshot, because they're not actually just dropping, they are starting to rev up. When they let go, the branch actually bounces back a little bit, which is one of the ways that you can. It's one of the ways you can sort of visualize that slingshot without having a high-speed camera. That was actually one of my first indications that they did that. That was a prediction I made back in my dissertation. That because no one had bothered to check, but I was like, oh, I don't think bats are falling to launch because there's very specific reasons why it would make sense. And I showed the math for it, and we were like, oh, that's great, you got the math, but you got to actually film them doing it. I said, well, I will film them do it, but I can do you one better. I can prove it now. And they said, how's that? And they pulled YouTube videos of flying foxes launching from branches. I was like, if I'm right, the branch should snap back. Like, yeah, it should actually. And that it does every time. See, especially if you get a bunch of them, you get enough body weight's worth of propulsion going. As always, zoos are a wonderful place to see what cool things animals can do.
Oakland Zoo. The Oakland Zoo near San Francisco across the bay. It's a really nice zoo, unlike San Francisco Zoo, which is also a nice zoo, except that often it's cold over there. The animals like to not be cold and they fight. The Oakland Zoo has really nice weather, and plus they have one of the best elephant exhibits ever. Scientists from all over the world to study the elephants because there's enough room for them to do their natural behaviors. But they have this large bat aviary, at least last time I was there, with these fairly large group. I think it had about at least 10 or more large black flying foxes. And I just was like, wow. We spent a couple hours just watching them.
It probably is really amazing. When you watch them on TV, you never really get the feeling of how big they are.
Huge, really.
Big pillowcases they are, kind of.
Yeah, they're really cool. San Diego, if you're in the southern part of the state, San Diego also has some flying foxes, although they don't have as large a group as Oakland. So they have I think 3 or 4. I think the Rodriguez flying foxes.
If all the flying foxes are on the same branch and trying to take off at the same time, wouldn't that affect each other? Like,
so they have to be spaced out. Yeah. Actually, in fact, you'll notice when they do take off, they're not right next to each other. They'll climb away a little bit to give themselves some space because they have to start flapping before they let go. Yeah. So they'll roost pretty tight, and they'll climb out to spread themselves out. They actually climb very well. In many cases, spend more time climbing than flying. Flying foxes actually really like to climb. If they can climb to their food, they'll do that preferentially to flying. It takes less energy.
This guy on the ground, he walked like a pterodactyl?
More or less, yeah. So with the proportions given, we were walking a little bit like a real vampire bat, but also because of the small legs and the bigger forelimbs, probably walk a lot like a pteranodon or Quetzalcoatlus, kind of big pterosaur, which were probably reasonably erect walkers actually. So essentially, their weight kind of sits over their forelimbs, and that kind of takes the weight, the compression, and then the hind limbs probably take most of their push. That's basically how they walk. Which is a weird way of walking, but it works when you have those kinds of weird, wacky proportions, and you have a ridiculous head to play with. Another fun thing about having a bat-like creature or a pterosaur-like creature, so when they have these big membrane wings, these small bodies, and these big heads, a lot of their mass is actually in their wings and their heads, which means they can do a lot of maneuvers and a lot of shifting just by shifting the position of a wing or the head to change the center of mass. So they have the option of changing the center of lift by retracting the wing or making a change on one side versus the other, which is what birds mostly do the maneuver. But they also have the option of changing the center of mass relative to the center of lift by just throwing a wing down real hard or throwing the head to the side or something like that. So there's a lot of different options they have in terms of those maneuvers. And in fact, that's how bats land on ceilings. If you want to see some stuff about this, there's a group at Brown, actually headed by one of my old dissertation advisors, and Sharon Swartz. She has a great group there where they film live bats, high-speed cameras, and they can film in low-light conditions. And what they found is that what the bats do when they come in for a ceiling landing is they come in towards the ceiling, they kind of go ballistic for a moment, so they stop flapping, and they throw one wing down. Because so much of their body mass is in their wings compared to, say, like a bird where it's not much less than the mass in the wings, that's actually enough to flip them over, just like an acrobat, like doing an aerial, just like using your core core power to kind of roll yourself over and your leg mass to help flip over. They do basically an aerial. They do a half flip, half twist, half cartwheel basically, and that brings them around. And then that also means that now they're turned around to the hook side of their claws are going towards the ceiling. They just catch it, which is pretty cool. We think our new drones are so cool, new little quadcopters. Like, look, I made it do a barrel roll. That's like, yeah, it's cute. Yeah, I do a half cartwheel, half barrel roll, half flip every time I land on the ceiling. And for me, that's sitting down. That's like sitting down to take a rest. You keep working on that, humans. Yep. Peace. I'm gonna go drink some blood.
Obviously, like we said, it's massive. You have wings and wings. How big would the rotisseris dorsi, those muscles on the back?
So those would be pretty bulky as well. So just to clarify, it's not that more than half of its weight is in its wings. It's just more of its weight is in its wings than for a comparable bird or other sort of flying animal of that nature. But it would have an awful lot of its mass in flight-related and limb-related muscles. And actually, being developmentally correct, anatomically correct, the chest muscles and the back muscles are limb muscles developmentally. Anything attaches to the scapula or any other part of the limb skeleton is technically a limb muscle. That doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of functional things per se, although it is a good thing to keep in mind in terms of where things attach. It also actually changes which nerves run them. So the nerves from your back actually don't go to the muscles like the lats of your back because they're limb muscles that usually front. The nerves have to do these weird U-turns, which is weird. But anyway, the lats would be quite large. So on a bird, what happens is, so gait is a big chest, but it's sort of a pterosaur-style chest. It's not a full-on bird-style chest. And the reason for that is bird chests are supersized because both the upstroke and downstroke muscles are on the bottom, right on the chest side. They have a pec major and a pec minor. Pec major is the downstroke muscle. It's sitting most ventral and most chest side, and then pec minor is under it. And that actually has a pulley system that goes up onto the top of the humerus, the upper arm bone. That's why it's an upstroke muscle. So birds are weird. Birds are cheating. They put both their big muscles for flight on the chest, with the upstroke muscle using a pulley to turn it into an upstroke muscle. It's still down here. That's why they need such a huge sternum. And actually, if you look at bird skeletons, the ones that have the biggest keel, that biggest ridge on the sternum, are the ones with the most powerful and fastest upstroke. They're bursters, they're sprinters. Things like chicken relatives, that are really good sprinters. Whereas things like ducks, that don't need much of an upstroke, they mostly just need a downstroke. They have a more shallow keel. They don't have as big a ridge, but they have a big broad plate of a sternum, because that's where the downstroke muscle attaches. But on bats, and we're fairly certain for pterosaurs as well, there's no pulley system. They're much more intuitive. The downstroke muscles are on the chest, the upstroke muscles are on the back. So upstroke muscles would include things like latissimus dorsi, would be an upstroke muscle, deltoid would be an upstroke muscle, teres major would be an upstroke muscle. Those guys are all now upstroke muscles. And then the downstroke muscles, your pec major, corpus brachialis, and things like that. So the good news is that if you're using a bat or a pterosaur model for your flying creature, where the muscles go for the different parts of the flight cycle are intuitive. You don't have to do this weird pulley stuff. Chest is big for downstroke, back is big for upstroke. That actually makes a lot of sense to everybody, including the people looking at your work. But the trick is you have to make sure you actually take that into account. So you have to give it a nice big back. So one of the things that happens sometimes is you see a bat-like kind of creature or a pterosaur kind of like creature in terms of sort of its overall look, but they were really thinking more about birds because that's what they're more familiar with when they designed it. And they'll give it they'll just give it a really big chest, and they'll ignore the back. That's fine as long as you're assuming it's got the pulley system and the bird system. But the mistake that sometimes comes up is they give it the bat-like chest and don't give the bat-like back. Now that poor animal is actually underpowered because it doesn't have the ripped back it needs for the upstroke. So always think about both halves of it. It's not all about the downstroke. You got to get the upstroke in there too.
So if you were designing a creature, based on the bat or whatever, and it was like a swamp or a, maybe semi-aquatic, would they be able to swim? If, like, say, I'm not sure if fishing bats can actually go in the water, or they just skim and pull?
They just skim and pull.
Would it need, if it was going to swim, like a fantasy creature, could you combine it with something, that it would be able to believably be able to feed, and still fly, feed in the water and still fly?
Sure, there's a lot of animals today that do that. There are two kind of primary modes for getting out of the water as a flying animal. One of them is a running launch on the surface, because jumping out of the water, of course, is difficult to do.
Yeah.
So that's what most of your ducks and swans and things like that do. Loons, and they've got nice big feet and lots of webbing, and they run over the surface.
And they're downstroke, so they're kind of pushing off the water.
They're kind of pushing off the water as well. But then there's the alternative. There are living animals that are very good at getting out of the water repeatedly, that plunge into the water for food that don't have web feet. And the most obvious one that comes to mind is the osprey. There are handfuls of osprey are great, and they're actually using their wings as the launch paddle. So they're actually doing a forelimb dominated launch. They use their tail, actually lever down with their tail and their wings, and just punch themselves out of the water. So they are just jumping out of the water, which is pretty darn impressive. Yeah. And that's what fishing bats do too if they end up in the water by accident. Okay. So they don't plunge in on purpose, but anytime you're doing, feeding foam, fish bowls, things happen. Yeah. The minnow is a little bigger than they anticipated. It pulls on them and they hit the water. And that's the same thing they do. They actually can swim, so they'll swim on the surface. If they're close to the shore, they'll swim on the surface to the nearest tree and climb up it, and then slingshot launch.
Okay.
If they're too far away, they will osprey launch. They'll use the wings. Because they don't have web feet. They can't have web feet because the feet have
Yeah,
bones.
because they, the body is different, like say from a duck or something.
I once also put it revolved eagle swing.
Yeah, it's really weird. Yeah, wings work better in the water than you might think. And you even have some animals. I mean, puffins are relative, so we call alcids. So the auks and such. These guys are great. They're what we call amphibious flyers, which is they use their wings in the air and underwater. They actually fly in underwater and they fly in the air. And what they do is they just adjust the span, right? So they need more wing area, they need in the air, and they need less wing area but more stiffness in the water, so they just tuck the wings. But you watch them swim underwater, they're doing a flight stroke underwater, and that's how they're swimming underwater. And they come to the surface and they run off the top, and then they fly again using the wings in the air, which is super cool. And there are some aquariums and such where you can watch them do that. Aquarium of the Pacific near here in Long Beach has a really nice puffin exhibit where there's good underwater viewing, and you can watch them. They won't fly in there, aerial fly, but you can watch them aqua fly, which is a lot of fun. Which is very, very cool. And of course, penguins are technically flying in the water. The strongest wing skeletons of any birds are actually penguins. Because they're flying in a medium that's about 1,000 times denser than penguins.
Well, that's good to know as as like an inspiration animal. If you have, making a creature that's got like a dense gravity or it's semi-aquatic, is to look at the water swimmer, the water flyers.
Yeah. And particularly, it depends if how much of an ecology, how much of a background and evolutionary history you need to give to your creatures or want to give to your creatures. But if you have a creature that is, say, descended from aerial flyers but it's now aquatic, like a penguin, that those animals probably will tend to use their wings for propulsion underwater rather than that's already the strongest part of their body.
It's always good to know so that your creature matches its environment.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and of course now there's an alpha. Whatever I say just appears. Fantastic.
It's swimming in the waters.
This is what happens when your project partner is a legend. It's just like Terrell's knowledge of animal behavior and anatomy and positioning is just ridiculous for anyone who doesn't already know that.
So if you're drawn here, if you want to do the part, like like body, how like this, like when I think of flying, just fighting, but with these, like they're tiny, like how.
So just so everyone could hear what the question was, fantastic question. Make sure everyone knows what it was before I answer. So the question was, we have an animal here with this kind of bat and pterosaur-like proportions, and what if you need to show conflict between them? You might see flying animals like eagles in battle, and they're using their talons, of course, but in this case, all the weaponry is up front, so it's a very different sort of scenario. It's a great question. We don't know, of course, how pterosaurs will fought between each other because we have no record of that. We can only speculate. So what I might do in this case, since it is in large part a giant bat-like creature and it is a mammal, is look at how mammals tend to fight. So you could take, it does have some front-end weapons other than the jaws. It has the big wings that it walks around on and the big claw. So you can imagine you can probably lash with that. There's no reason it can't stand on 3 legs at a time. But also just biting and head slamming and neck slamming. This thing has a big bulldog neck on it to hold up that big head. That is actually also, to some extent, borrowed from pterosaurs, many of which also had big bulldog necks. The spike was often illustrated. So for those who weren't at our little talk where I mentioned this on Friday, and even if you were, I'll reiterate it. Pterosaurs did not have skinny necks. Some of them had reasonably slender necks, other ones had very thick bulldog-like necks, but none of them had little skinny bird-like necks. That's just a bird thing. And if you look at the neck vertebrae on pterosaurs are often the largest vertebrae in the body, much larger even than the ones of the torso or the pelvis. There's an animal I worked on a lot for my graduate work, and Anna Garrett's head's about this long, its pelvis is about this long. It's the both feet can fit in one eye socket, one orbit together comfortably. The neck vertebrae are about this big, nice chunky things, tons of muscle attachments, and the torso vertebrae about this big, and the sacral ones are about that, about a third or less, quarter of the size. So it's like all neck. We don't know. I mean, we think it's mostly for feeding, but sure as heck would hit hard if it swung that thing at. And particularly with robust jaws, robust brain case, everything that mammals have and this animal has, I can imagine it's or just biting. I mean, it takes a chunk out of it. It's rough.
Because it has an artist like that.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of a mammalian take on a dragon. So could they fly in the air? Sure. Biting in the air is hard to do. That's popular, but actually they're slamming into your jaw joint. So I would expect more like wing slams or even raking with the hind limb claws. I mean, they're not tiny. They have small hind limbs, but you imagine you can just make a flyby and just kind of rake it. To that end, you could maybe even take some inspiration from fishing bats, like we were talking about earlier. So these are really cool. Jason's noctilio, they're also called bulldog bats or mastiff bats because their faces look like a mastiff. These are really cute with big jaw. They're pounding all the time. Very cute. What they do is they fly low over the water and they echolocate beam at the water. And they wait until they get reflection that shows that there's a little bit of a wake. That tells them there's a minnow close enough to the surface to hit. And what they have are giant meat hooks. Just these ridiculous looking claws, all cute up front and they're all business in the back. And they just break the surface of the water and hope they skewer something. And you can imagine these things, if you have a decent claw in the back of the Martians, for example, if we needed a conflict scene, and just raking each other. Just do a flyby and you try to get over the top of the other one. Maybe put a really bad tear as a leading break. That would be catastrophic. They can take some tears in the leading break, but if you go all the way through and the thing separates, it's going to fall out of the sky. So you can do that. That would be a really nasty, catastrophic thing to do to the other one that you're going after, for example. That could work. Or even you could do strikes with the head and neck in flight, but probably not in flight. Fighting in flight's hard, there's jamming in like that. But blunt force trauma can be really nasty to flying animals because they usually have thin wall bones. They have large diameters, which makes the bone strong in terms of like absorbing broad impacts or bending forces and things like that. But they're thin wall, which makes to give them a high stiffness to strength or stiffness to weight ratio. But that makes them relatively weak to impacts. So if you smash part of the skeleton of a bird, it'll just crumple. Which is what actually the greatest bird-eating birds do. That's what peregrine falcons do. They actually don't grab it; they punch it because they're going so fast they would break their own toes if they grab it. Although after they punch it, they'll sometimes come around and grab it. So you can find videos of them grabbing things out of the air. But you notice the thing is kind of drifting for some reason. That's because they've already broken it. I used to work with falconers, both professional and hobby reasons. I used to work at rehab facility with raptors, and I've seen a falcon punch a duck like full on tilt, and the duck folds in half. It's grim. It's not nice things. If you like ducks, don't look for these videos.
They're going 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, they're going 200 miles an hour plus, and they just slam it, and they just double fist punch, and the thing just cracks because the skeleton can't handle focused impact like that. Handle broad impact, like hitting the water like punching out your bird, they're spreading it out. Pelicans have bones about 1 millimeter thick, and they're hitting the water at high speed, but it's spreading the force out in one area. If you took a little hammer and hit the pelican, it would shatter.
There was crows that were teasing with a
Yeah.
and then it actually turned upside down. That's what I was trying to show here and right to the bottom of the crow.
Oh, that was rough. So then, this is a story to tell us from my childhood. Back home, we had a resident Cooper's hawk, which are another bird-eating hawk, and crows. Have you guys ever seen crows mob hawks and owls and such? Okay, so young crows, a significant source of mortality in young crows, essentially adolescent crows, particularly adolescent male crows, but not that different from adolescent male humans. One of the sources of injury and mortality is picking a fight with the wrong individual. So they have to learn which hawks they can attack and which ones they can't. So it takes time for them to learn that, like, oh, a red-tailed hawk, it's basically a bomber. It's slow. I can go and just like mess with this sucker. Or that owl in daylight, it's not going to but they sometimes learn the hard way that you should not pick a fight with a peregrine falcon or a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk or something like that, because they will kick your butt. And I actually see it happening with young crows, little bachelors group basically, and they've been mobbing the red-tailed hawks in the area for the last week, and they're thinking they're awesome. They think they're full of themselves. They're like, yeah, this thing was twice our size, and we kicked its butt. Like, yeah, 6 of you. It's not that impressive actually, but and then they see this Cooper's hawk, which is like their size, flying like, oh man, even better. And they're mobbing it, and they're getting the thing's going a little faster and going a little faster. It's like, oh, just leave me alone. You know, this thing's not actually a threat. It's just outrunning most of them. Finally, one of these says, I'm going to have a go for it. And it goes down to try to get a good pecking on the back of this thing. And the Cooper's hawk pulls in its wings, flips belly up, and does a double talon rake, and just takes the bottom of the crow off. The thing screams and just plummets out of the sky. And all the other crows go, and just scatter. I mean, the only time in my life I can confidently say I've seen birds curse. That was every crow screaming an F-bomb right there. That's what that was. They just scattered in all directions. They were terrified. They'd never seen anything like that in life. They had no idea that could happen, and it just railed this thing upside down, and it just.
I was wondering because I always see them picking on hawks, and then all of a sudden I just see one hawk chasing them. That must be why.
Yes. Oh, it's the other way around. Oh, this is something specialized to kill things like us, so we shouldn't have done that. Which actually brings up a kind of a cool general behavioral point as well for flying creature design, which is don't be afraid to let them go ballistic a little bit. And I don't mean that as in like the colloquial term of like being angry. I mean like literally a ballistic trajectory. Right? Like the flying animals, particularly small ones, but even big ones to a certain degree, they will let themselves, they'll go out of flight and get back into flight, basically, for brief maneuvers. Some of the maneuvers involve tucking their wings and just going right through a cranny or splitting a tree or something. There's some goshawks do that. Those things just, they know. I think hunting for them is like an obsession. They're just like, I'm going to get that rabbit no matter what. But they'll tuck in their wings, they'll flip upside down. I've seen sharp-shinned hawks come up underneath a branch to grab a cardinal from the top of it. So the thing has got enough juice that it comes up, goes ballistic, grabs it, and just does the fall. It was like the Millennium Falcon, like drifting, straight shot scene from the kicker of the kickoff from the new trilogy from episode 7. Yeah, where it drifted. That's what it basically did. It was like, I'm just going to drift, and I got you. Right up from underneath, so you couldn't see it approach. So they will do controlled falls and then reorient themselves. They can do things like that. We don't do things like that with our aircraft because they hit the ground and explode. But animals can recover very quickly. They're just very, very fast. What constitutes fast is very different. I mean, when it's this big, it's going to be very slow for a flying animal. It might still only have a half a second launch time. 3/4 of a second launch time, which seems really fast to us because our idea of like the unit of time, the fast unit of time is a second. So I'll be there in a second. That's our way of saying I'm going to be there quickly. Yeah, a second is forever for a flying animal. Like that's a long time. In our world, we tend to think of like cats are fast. Cats are fast animals. Ever see a cat try to hit a hummingbird? My parents had a pet cat that tried to hit a hummingbird. It was comically bad. It was so bad the hummingbirds were taunting it. They would fly up to it and the cat would go for it and it would zip back and they'd be like, and then it would come up to its face. They were actually getting in its face and zipping back. Which, in order for it to be a game, it has to be 100% safe, right? No animal would risk it. Be like, there's a 5% chance of hitting. No. There's a 0% chance of it getting connected. It's like a Spider-Man movie, where they show it from his perspective. Like someone goes to punch him and he's just like, oh, that's interesting. That's what this thing was doing to a cat, which is so blindingly fast to us that you can't even see its paws going. Like, I don't know if you ever been scratched by your cat, but like, well, I didn't even see where that came from. To the hummingbird, that's just like, whoa. It's time to contemplate, count the hairs on the paw. So it's, what do you think? Yeah, interesting. Pluck one off just to annoy him. So it's a very different kind of scale of speed as well. So like the largest pterosaurs, the super giants I was talking about before, their flapping time, a full cycle is probably just a little under a second to do a full upstroke and downstroke. And there are known scaling laws of flight, mathematics that can be easily applied to get this kinds of estimates based based on how heavy you think they are in the wingspan and things like that. So it's not exact, but roughly in that range. So that's what slow is. That's the slowest wing cycle that's probably ever existed on a real flying animal on Earth, is a little under a second for a full stroke. So these are animals that think in terms of tenths of seconds, right, or hundredths of a second, not full seconds. A lot happens in a full second. Slowest, just under a second, about 0.9. The best estimate for a full flight cycle in Quetzalcoatlus northropy, which holds the tides for the record for the largest flying animal known, would be about 0.9 seconds. Give or take, tenth of a second. So it could be a full second, it could be 0.8, something like that. And of course, you can push these limits a little bit. You can slow things down and speed them up a little bit to help tell your story better. I'm not going to get here to argue that if it's not mathematically correct, it's not good storytelling. But if it's in the ballpark, it can make it more compelling. It'll feel more real. We know intuitively, and your audience knows intuitively, that flying animals are quick. Knowing exactly how quick is, of course, part of the trick. That's where doing some of the background research and reading and observing animals and everything really helps. Because your audience doesn't have to be able to do the calculation, but you have to be able to do the calculation if you really want it to be compelling. They'll just know that looked like that was too slow, or that looked like that was too fast. It doesn't match with what I've seen. Like, they've seen seagulls, they've seen sparrows, so their brain has some idea of how flight scales. They just can't actually work it out for themselves. You guys as wonderful artists and storytellers can do that, and it makes us believe it because it matches what their brain knows roughly the way these things work.
So that speed, does that cross over to, like, say, just their brain reflexes, or is it just their physical speed? So,
it's both.
Both?
It's
so
both,
their
yeah.
whole point of view of the world is everything is just faster than we could probably process it. Not just their wings and their flight, but just their brain.
Right. Everything looks slowed down to them, basically.
Okay.
And how much depends on how big they are. So a hummingbird, everything looks really slow by comparison to what we experience. Whereas this thing, it might be a little bit slower than what we experience. What happens in the fast part of your brain is called the cerebellum. So we have the cerebrum. That's for doing the really complex thinking stuff, but it's not actually where you do most of your quick motor decisions and things like that. That's actually done in the cerebellum. The cerebellum has, I think, about 1,000 times the neural density, which is the number of connections per unit volume, as the cerebrum. It's much, much faster, but it does basic stuff fast. It's not what you use. It's not what you use to sort of, for example, figure out where you should be eating tonight, given all the dietary needs of everyone in your group. It is, however, what you use to figure out how you should change your footfalls because you just hit sand from pavement. So if you've ever run along the beach and you hit the point where the water's hitting and lapping up on the beach and it gets softer and all of a sudden it feels kind of weird, and for a couple of strides you're off and then you adapt. That was the couple of strides it took your cerebellum to completely recalculate your entire gait cycle in order to walk on this new substrate. That's how long it takes. It's super fast. Flying animals have big old cerebellum. Birds have they have a pretty big cerebrum too. They're pretty bright animals, especially things like parrots and stuff. Like they have like some of the roughly the cognitive ability of a young human child. There was a famous African gray use in psychology experiments named Alex, who had something like a 500-word vocabulary and understood fundamental things like absent values. One of the most mind-blowing things I've ever seen from a bird or any animal is they brought a tray to him, this bird, and they had a bunch of red trucks on there. They said, "What color are the trucks, Alex?" He said, "Red." He says, "How many are there?" He said, 16. Okay, great. They ran another tray of blue and red trucks. They have them do the same thing with blue and red. And then they say, "How many green trucks are there?" He says, "None." Humans get that about age 4 to 5, just FYI. So it was basically preschool. So they're smart, but they have a really big cerebellum by comparison. So even in a parrot that has this huge cerebrum, it's doing so much cognitive, it has so much cognitive power, it's still the cerebellum almost as big as the cerebrum. And that's which makes the ratio look not as impressive, because our cerebrum is really big compared to cerebellum. What's happening is they're both big. The cerebellum has to be big because it flies.
So would it be like a trade-off where you would have a smarter bird, might have maybe a little slower, smaller cerebellum, but he would be smarter and able to figure things out, but his reflexes would be slower, or you would have one that's really fast and but just kind of dumb.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, if you're fixed on total brain volume, then you start to hit trade-offs. What parrots have done to break the trade-off is they hit big heads. And they just.
Okay, so if you want both, you would have to enlarge the head just to fit everything in there.
Yeah.
For example, in our book, for the basic anatomy of birds, we've chosen the highest macaw. It's like a huge head. You notice it, especially when you take the feathers off it. It's like little body, huge head.
I never really thought, but yeah, the head to body proportion varies so much in birds.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. So things like, and interesting enough, some of the things that are going to be really bright have big heads. Parrots, hornbills, for example. Whereas by comparison, say the brain case on pelican has a big head because it has big jaws, but the brain case is not all that impressive.
Yeah.
Pelicans are cool animals, but they're not the sharpest tools in the shed. Yeah. No, they're not that bright. Compared to the parrot's just like, oh, you're embarrassing me, man. Come on, feathered brethren here. I'll get the fish this time. He's like, you tried the same spot 20 times. What is wrong with you? Even I could be. Yeah, so it's. That got with the pit, which has happened, yes. Yeah, that has happened. Actually, while we're speaking of the book, just as a quick note, a little plug. So Terryl and I do have a book coming out early to mid-2020, working title of Flying Monsters, and it will be all about creating flying creatures and sort of the biology behind them, and it'll be full of both real flying animals, their anatomy, and cool principles of flight, as well as. There we go. I'm on the cover. Yeah, so look for this in early mid-2020. This, by the way, is a feature critter here. Never actually existed, but could totally work. We've nicknamed it the killer dactyl. But what Terryl did was she took all of the cool anatomy and science data and everything that I'd given her about early pterosaurs and late pterosaurs and blended the two groups together. So it's got a lot of early pterosaur anatomy, like this crazy crossing needle teeth, but scaled up to late pterosaur size with a late pterosaur head to body ratio where it has the giant head, and but it's got the early pterosaur long tail. And anyway, you combine all these proportions, what you get is something that's extra creepy looking because the early pterosaurs were extra fearsome looking, but it's giant and can still fly and launch at that giant size because it's got all the late pterosaur tricks for that. So a really nice example of how we've been kind of blending these things, blending different animals, in this case two groups of different fossil animals, related but different, to create a novel imagined creature. And so that'll be the whole theme of the book. It'll be chock full of that. It'll have this guy in it. Still trying to brainstorm a cool name. I don't know if you like the one I floated on email.
Oh, that's fine.
I was thinking we might call it Nosferatu Rex. For a scientific name. Would be kind of fun. As far as I know, that is not actually that name would in fact be legal, if you will. I don't believe it is currently occupied by any other organism. Dracula actually is. The genus Dracula is occupied. It's not a bat, strangely, and disappointingly enough, it is a plant. It has a flower in it that does not look bat-like. It's a cool plant, but I still kind of feel like that was a missed opportunity. They got cheated, yeah. So, incidentally, one of the animals that is sort of tied for largest flying animal of all time are the giant pterosaurs. So Quetzalcoatlus is from Texas. They really do make them bigger in Texas. But the other one is called Hatzegopteryx, and it is from Romania, and is specifically from Transylvania. Not that that's really the formal name for the region, but the region that Westerners refer to as Transylvania.
How do you spell that?
I'm sorry?
How do you spell it?
Sure. Hatzze. It's a G-O-P-T. It's got that silent P in there. E-R-Y-X. E-R-Y-X. Yeah, that's right. Hatzegopteryx. Which just means winged animal from the Hayteg Basin, which I think was really a missed opportunity. Like you found a grizzly bear masked, like F-16 wingspan flying animal in Romania, and you called it a winged thing from the Hayteg Basin. I don't know, Dracula, Bram Stoker eye comes to mind. Vladimir, yeah.
Barnabas Collins.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. Yeah, or just, you know.
We're dead and laughing.
The castle. Yeah. Yes.
So you see a lot of mythical dragons with long necks and long tails. I was wondering, would either of those be possible in a flying creature that size based on those?
So the question was, you see big dragons with long necks and long tails, and would that work? To some extent it might. Now there's when it comes to necks and heads and tails, there's two things to consider. One is the total mass that you're adding, the other is where you're adding it, right? Where you're adding the weight. So the first issue is if you put a big tail on it and don't put a big head and neck on it, you've got potentially a pitching problem, right? You have to really potentially back sweep your wings a lot to line it up, and that's actually not very good. If you don't have a big tail on it, and you have a big head and neck on it, then you'll potentially have a pitching problem the other way, although that one's not as bad because you can forward sweep the wings more easily than back sweep the wings work better that way. So either way, you've got to make the wings align, and if it's too much, you won't be able to make the wings line up, and it's just not going to work. So you need a certain amount of balance there. So if you're going to add some tail, you might want to add some head and neck. But the second problem, how much total weight you add, that just depends on basically how much power overall you give the thing for takeoff and flight. The tail's not going to help, the head and neck's not going to help. They're all there for other things. So if you really are trying to go for something that really feels more real, what I usually recommend is taking some tips from biology. We found that the real giants and those flyers, the true flying giants, just in the tail, and they had a big head and neck, but the head's really light, it's got a lot of air spaces in it, and they force with the wings, and that's how they did it. It's not saying the only way you can do it, but it's the most efficient way to do it.
What about adding, like, if you had, just to kind of throw it out, if you had, like, a membrane that was, like, thin, maybe almost invisible, that went in from, like, the wing area and used that neck length to kind of attach into as a gliding supplement, would that work?
Sure,
or
yeah, you could do that as well.
See, like, add, like, little extra feathery gills or something that can, you know, fly. So if you have a neck, you might want to put something that would make it, you know, as a stabilizer or, you know, to hang things on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you put another little wing surface up on the neck that isn't a flappy wing surface, but it helps support in cruise, it helps support that wing. Absolutely. So you can, yeah, potassium coming down to the shoulder up the neck or something like that. There's no reason you couldn't do that. That would be very cool.
Propatagium, right?
I'm sorry?
That's propatagium, right?
Propatagium would be here. Yeah, you can take it away from the neck. To give you an idea of a real animal that did something like that, but kind of in the reverse. So, and they feature prominently in our book as well, microraptorines. So these are cool animals. The name for the original was Microraptor. There's a bunch of species in them now. And these were critters that were fully feathered, predatory dinosaurs that were not birds. Very close to birds, and probably flight capable, but were not birds. The largest is a thing called Chonguraptor, which is about golden eagle size. The smallest is a tiny little thing about songbird size. Microraptor is about crow size. I'm particularly proud of Chonguraptor, but it's entirely a shameless plug because my team is the one that named it. So there we go. So it's Stone to name it. So it's a collaboration between myself, other colleagues here at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, and colleagues in China, particularly Beijing. We described it as the biggest non-bird flying dinosaur, which is very cool. But one thing that all those microraptors had in common is they weren't true birds, they didn't have full bird proportions, they still have like a velociraptor style kind of torso length, which means their center of mass tends to be a little bit further back than would be ideal. And rather than having wings that would come way back, what they did is they had a very long tail, the longest tail proportionally to their body length of any predatory dinosaur. And there was a wing on the end of it, there was a tail fan of feathers on the end of it, which of course is not a flapping wing, but it's a pitch control wing. And that's producing enough lift on the tail end to pull it back nose down so that it doesn't go nose up from having the long torso. So they were actually doing exactly what you're describing, but in the back end way. I don't know of any animal that does it on the front end way, but it can still totally work.
If you're making a fantasy animal, if
Sure,
you're
why
going to
not?
put these, something that looks cool, you need to make a reason for it to be that way. You know, nature isn't just going to like throw it extra.
Sure, and in fact, there are living animals that do that trick. It's just not visually apparent, and in creature design, you want to make it visually apparent. So flamingos and swans have a long neck. They often hold them out when they're flying. Right? The neck position they use and the exact taper of the neck actually allows them to produce some lift from the neck. They're spinning vortices laterally over both sides of the neck, and so they're actually helping support the neck and head with lift. Their neck is basically the neck's acting like a very weak wing, but it doesn't look like what people are used to being a wing. So if you really wanted to sell that idea with a fancy creature, particularly the head's even bigger, I think adding a protaging up the neck would be a good way to do that.
Okay.
Just from my perspective.
Any thoughts on Shard
Oh, with the Heinlein glide surface, it's cool and wacky and awesome.
It's the only thing that's ever done that, right?
Not anything else I'm aware of, other than the fact that pterosaurs have a membrane back there, but it's not their main.
That's not their only thing.
That's their only thing. Yeah, it's just having help support back in if there's control and things like that. But that's how we do that. Yeah, it's the only thing I know of that does full weight support for the badges. So this is a critter that's Crossovictrix that had a fossil animal that has preserved with the fossil membranes on the hind limbs. It has really long hind limbs and normal length forelimbs, and the hind limbs actually sprawl out and become wings. There's obligate glider, probably not a flapping flyer, but it's a hind limb based winged animal. Super creepy and weird, super cool, great inspiration. It's going to be in our book as well. So we have a whole section on non-powered flyers, on gliders that's going in there, and it does feature. Oh, there we go. And ask him to show all of it. Big sketch of it. Perfect. Yeah, that's kind of what it's like. It's like those little styrofoam planes that you throw, but it was scrambling around on trees. And that's early Triassic.
Do you have any thoughts on like when the division between dromaeosaurs and birds really happens? Because some of the people I've been talking to are talking like dromaeosaurs that may be secondarily flightless birds. If you consider Archaeopteryx a bird, you should probably consider Velociraptor a bird.
Well, if it nests where those individuals think it does, that's not the most popular opinion, but it is a most popular viewpoint, but it is common. Things like, so the idea here basically is, it turns out Velociraptor and other dromaeosaurs, Deinonychus, these things, these really cool bird-like nasty raptors, as they're called in colloquial sense now, thanks to Jurassic Park. Those guys are turned to be so bird-like that it's not out of the possibility that they actually are secondarily flightless. So in other words, Microraptor, which is like a small version of them that can fly, it looks like it may have been an earlier branch from them, which means that the earlier ones may have been flight capable, and then some of them lost flight, and flight might actually predate true birds. And then the question is, do we change what we define as being a bird, or do we just keep the same terminology and just say that some things are birds are fine? And I don't have to call them
dinosaurs still birds.
Yeah, you can do that, which totally makes sense. I don't have a strong opinion on it myself, because I do my work is really more focused on biomechanics and performance and what they can do, rather than the systematics of what they're called. But it does make a point, and I do like the idea. This is very cool. Is that Komodo?
Yes.
Yeah. So, kind of fun story. One of my best friends and the crew chief on my field expeditions is the individual who did the dissertation on Komodo dragon feeding and how they solved it. He's on my day morning. He's like, oh God, we figured that out. Super, super cool. Love it. My current PhD student works on mosasaurs. He's like a lot of piranhas. It's just kind of fun. So I do things that swim sometimes too. Comments, feedback, questions, yeah.
I was wondering, when you talk about the
Oh yeah. So the question was about the thumbs on the wings. So bats have 4 elongated fingers that stretch the wing membrane, and they go to the fingers down to along the upper limb, along the side of the body, and they attach to the hind limb. But they have the 5th finger, actually the 1st finger, the way we count them in anatomy, so the equivalent of our thumb, that's actually free of the wing membrane typically. And they can use that for climbing, for flying foxes, they can use that for walking. Desmodus, the modern vampire bat, common vampire bat, actually has a really, really large one, and it uses it to help launch. So it will kick off with the feet first, it's on those, walking on those thumbs, and then it starts to push off, and the last thing to come off are the thumb tips, which gives it a nice, good bit of extra leverage coming off that way, which is really neat. So it's going to have the same kind of musculature that we would have. So it's going to have a big, long tendon running to the base of it with a muscle belly in the forearm, just like it does in ours. That is called the flexor pollicis longus. For anyone who really likes their anatomical terms, it just means long flexor of the thumb. Because this technical term for a thumb is pollex. Okay. So he's got two pollices and likes the anatomy. This guy. So this is the pollex. The big toe is called the hallux. So on birds, for example, that have a reverse toe, that like say on raptors with the talons, the one that's on the backside, that's actually the first toe, so that's the hallux. So you'll sometimes hear reference, getting back to the questions and conversation about conflict between the creatures, you'll hear a reference to a hallux strike from some birds of prey who will actually just hit with that rear puncturing claw. They call it hallux strike. The first one is called hallux, same time. So in this case, the pollex, the thumb, is nice and big, a big claw, and it gives it good traction on the ground. It gives it like a bit extra pull. Vampires use that to launch extra power that they need with a heavy blood meal. This guy's going to need it just because he's free hit. Not necessarily. So the interesting couple interesting things on the anatomy here.
It's kind of our fantasy.
This is our fantasy. So yeah. So real living bats don't have claws. Most of them don't have claws on anything other than the thumb. Some of them do retain a small claw on the second toe. We thought it would be cool to exaggerate it a little bit because we think it makes it a little scary. They don't do much with it, although they can climb with it a bit and sometimes hook things with it, but they're really mostly using the first. But we're just sort of exaggerating. In this case, more just the overall aesthetic of this fearsome creature. And for those who have just joined us recently, as a quick update on what this creature is, so this is an imagined creature. It is obviously very much based on living bats, specifically a living vampire bat, as well as rotundus, but it has been blended with pterosaur anatomy in terms of its proportions to make it flight capable and launchable at a very large size. So that's where you get the exaggerated front end of the animal, so the smaller hind limbs, the expanded chest, big, rich sternum, with the manubrium on there, big head, big neck, and we figured with a few other little touches, like real vampire bats don't have any molars because they just drink blood. For this thing's probably getting some blood, but also some flesh at that side, so we gave it some slight molars as well, and things like that, to make it biologically plausible. The starting point was I did the field sketch, if I had found this thing in the late Pleistocene deposits of Romania. So we're doing our take essentially on the vampire legend, the Dracula legend. What if this is the creature that inspired the Dracula legend? But the idea is to force it to be physically plausible. So I did it really rough and quick and easy on purpose, as if I've been in a field notebook. I can render things better than I promise, although I can't do what Terryl can do. But I wanted it to specifically look like all I had was my notebook and a ballpoint and sitting on a rock. And sketches out. That's what I do when I find actual specimens of giant things in the desert. And there's lots of little details that added to make it physically plausible, like the giant killed maneuvering. Real bats would have a small keel on there. We gave it more of a pterosaur bird style muscle attachment area. It's going to need more of that because it's big. There's a scale bar on there. The head on this thing is supposed to be almost 3 meters long. So massive, so pterosaur-sized head, which is like the size of all the giant pterosaurs. And it can run around the ground and take chunks out of you and then fly away. So that's the gist.
Is there like any evolutionarily where you would have multiple limbs, like something that's got 6 legs, that it's got it's flying and it has like its one leg is its wings, another the front, or like polydactylism, where maybe you could have a functioning hand in addition to the fingers splaying out. Is there anything like that, or would you look at what would I look at for source?
Yeah, you can look for source. I mean, the only things that really do anything like that in our world are insects, which have their walking limbs, and they're technically not limbs. But when it's a hexapodal flyer, for example, which are very popular, right? It's a creature design that's often requested or commissioned.
Yeah.
it's very tricky actually to make that work, but there are ways of doing it. Terrell's actually designed some really cool plausible ones. We've done a really cool new take, or she's done a really cool new take on a hippogriff, for example. And part of the trick is making sure that the attachment of the additional limb set is in a place that makes sense. So you can stacking the scapulae right over each other is difficult to do. You got to make sure that you put it in the right place. You want kind of stacked in space, but one's lateral and one's more dorsal. That there's places for the muscles to run up to the wing and make all that work. You also need to be extra careful with center of mass. It's very, if you put it in the middle of the back, then it's going to have a pitching problem because it's going to tend to be a front-heavy animal, especially if it's a big flyer. So that could be an issue. So you got to bring those wings forward on it. And then what you really want to be able to do, if you really want it to look like it can actually do the things it's doing, is again, it should be able to jump with as many of its limbs as possible. So if the wings can also touch the ground, it'll have as much launch power as you can get, right? So if it's a hexapodal animal, if it's a hexapodal launcher, that's the best possible scenario from the standpoint of the physics and the biology and anatomy of it making sense. Obviously, you can push the limits. This is supposed to be creative design. This is making good art, not necessarily good science, but a little bit of science in there can make the art stronger. At least that's art. So that would be, and we've done that for our science. So they jump like a horse, but then the wings can come down and also push, and so you can get
Trying to listen as things get more realistic digitally as far as rendering goes. The more realistic the rendering, the way the transparent kind of the way it can rally, like it's so real, but it creeps me out. I don't know why. So if you decrease the odds by having the animal, we're familiar with, say, how birds jump from the ground, horses jump over fences. We're way too familiar with that. So if we can integrate that into the way our imagined effects are doing it, less of a weirded out feeling.
And it's amazing the things that your brain can actually intuitively pick up on is not quite right. The trick, of course, the design end of it is that you can't just intuit your way through. You have to, to some extent, know. For you guys, the job is more difficult because you're trying to, for all of us, trying to tell a good story and try to communicate a compelling creature to an audience that can tell if it doesn't quite make sense, even though they can't tell you why. And so what we're kind of working on is making it easier and more transparent to work in that reason why, to pull that in and make it a part of the design. And it's actually not that hard to do. It's just the problem is that very few people that work in things like biomechanics and code mechanics and things like that also think in terms of visualization and communication. I'm one of the few who does. So we're kind of taking that to heart, and hopefully it's useful. More designers build better creatures. So the story can be very new in most respects, but it still usually needs at least a few familiar components. If you think of it, in order for really hook people in, if you think of the creature as being its own story in a way, it needs some familiarity, it needs something that you can be attached to. So the idea, for example, that the wing sweep here matches up with the center of mass. Like, you have to actually know how that works to do it properly, but you don't know exactly how that has to work in order to just be able to intuit as someone who's looked and who's viewing the rendering that, oh yeah, that seems to make sense. Right? Intuit that the wing on the back and the head's really big, it doesn't make sense.
So learning anomaly is like, even if you don't understand, like the big giant heavy four-legged dragon with, like that's not gonna. There's no way that could actually fly.
Sure.
But you get more subtle and it's just like still like, oh, you don't want people to question whether something could do what you want it to do. You want it seamless enough that they don't even question it. It just looks right enough that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you understand the root principles, fundamental principles, the nice thing is you can make adjustments very easily. So if they throw you a curveball and it's, oh, we want it to be bigger. How do you keep that? How do you keep the right balance between feeling real and feeling new and imagining with it being bigger? And if you understand the underlying principles, you don't have to go back to the you don't have to go back to scratch. You can scale it properly. Actually, one of the primary things I get hired to do studios when I'm working that side of my life. I'm not typically the one doing the primary feature design, feature concept. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of that, some sketches. But mostly what they hire me to do is actually write math that makes the creature design scalable, and morphable, so that. Yeah.
Go to the rings. Worked on dragon.
I do a lot of dragons. That tends to be one of the most popular requests. Is we're doing a dragon. We know it's going to be big. We don't know how big yet. But we want to make sure that whatever we do in the tweaking design as we go along, it stays launchable and flyable, at least semi-realistic. And if you can tie that to some underlying mathematics, then what happens is, then I can hand that to you like, whatever you plug and chug where this lines up, it will work. So if you change this value, this tells you how much you have to change that value, how much you have to change that value. And of course, they won't always stick to it exactly. It's still a fantasy world. It's still a magic world. You can allow some error bars on it, but I can also give them some idea of how much error you can allow before I would expect an audience especially this one. Like this you could fudge by about 20%, and people won't really notice. But this, if you fudge that by 20%, no one will really notice.
Can you talk about the wings?
Sure.
Type of structure there, layering.
Say again? In between digits, yeah.
Actual webbing.
Yes. So, the membrane wings on bats and pterosaurs. In this case, we actually direct evidence from pterosaurs, so we don't have to hypothesize this. We have soft tissue preservation or something. There are actually fibrous tissues. So there's muscles in there. There's also a lot of actin fibrils, so actin filaments and things like that give it a certain amount of stiffness. It can't be too loose and soft, and it has to be kept in tension in flight. So every soft wing, every plant wing, actually every wing in general, particularly plant wings, have a threshold that is called their aeroelastic number. Okay, aeroelasticity, by the way, is one of the hottest topics in modern aerospace engineering and everything. It's something else that I get, another part of my life I sometimes get called on to speak to with people like Lockheed Martin and Scout Deposits and those sorts of people. So sometimes I go and work in film studios and make monsters, and sometimes I go to Lockheed and tell them how to make them drones. Stuff like that. And the reason that places like Lockheed want to make soft wing things is because you can morph the wing, you can change it in a fraction of a second to suit exactly the speed and the conditions that you're in. The bad news is it has this aeroelastic number, which is the threshold at which it flutters too much and no longer becomes a good lifting surface. It can't be flapping around like a flag, which also means, by the way, that that's not a good thing to show in a final animation. So it's very popular to try to show the airflow over the creature. There's wings flapping around. Oh, it must be going really fast. It's wings flapping around. Yeah, no, it's about to die. So a much better option is to show the flow over the integument of the creature. Right? You can show airflow in the fur, the feathers, and all that stuff can run on. But the wing membrane itself can flutter a little bit. Shouldn't flutter much. Now, there are a couple of different ways of dealing with that. Part of it is that it's pulling on the wing at all times with those fingers to keep it tension. But the amount of tension it has to put on it has to do with the material properties of the wing. The softer the wing, the more tension it has to put in. And of course, if it's too soft, it's putting too much, and it's just not realistic. So those fibers, that webbing in there, is making it a little bit stiffer, a little stronger, so it doesn't have to do so much of the tensioning actively. And living bats do that. We're exaggerating it here, Terrell's exaggerating it here, so you can really see it, because it probably would be exaggerated in such a big animal, and it helps communicate the point, because it's important physically. And so their wings can change shape a lot, but they're not putty. They've got some fibrous aspect to them. And they also have nerve endings in them, and they have some muscle in them. So the wing surface itself is like a smart wing that can adapt immediately to reflex to changing airflow and things, which is very cool. Some other notes on the wing structure and shape. So you'll notice, speaking of being tension, that the trailing edge is concave. Each section is a little bit concave. It's either straight to concave. None of it is convex. You cannot tension a convex membrane wing unless you have like battens going in it. So like a sail, a racing sail, it's just a type of wing, lifting surface. It can be convex. They make some of them convex, but only because they're laminated stiff sails with battens going along. In general, you can't do that with an animal very well with a membrane wing and any kind of biological tissue. and so it really should have a concave trailing edge. There's no way to tension a convex trailing edge. The other thing is, wing tips usually are a little bit rounded. They can be very sharp, as Terrell's done here, but it works best if they're a little bit recurved, which she's also done. So she's matched the have a little bit recurved tip with that very sharp end. And actually, living bat wings do that naturally a little bit because that last bone of the wingtip, that last phalanx, that is actually really flexible. If you get a fresh flying fox skeleton, big bat skeleton, and you take the last phalanx of one of the wing digits out of that box, that, again, fairly fresh, not dried skeleton, you can tie it in a knot without it breaking. It is that flexible. It's a loose knot, but it's a knot. You can move it, thread it through, and it'll bounce right back. What's happening is it's not that mineralized. Bone is not just made of mineral. It is made of a combination of mineral, some cells, and a lot of proteins, which is some collagen. And we think of a lot of proteins rather than much mineral. If you want to make your own bendy bone, to play around with the concept of bendy bone, you can make your own at home. Get the bone, like a chicken bone or something that's good, something that's readily available. A thin one will probably work the best, but whatever, get some chicken bone, get some chicken wings or whatever. Grab one of those, and then drop it in vinegar for a week. That'll dissolve the mineral content, but it will not dissolve the protein. And then it'll look about the same. It'll look a little off colored, but for the most part, it'll look about the same. But when you pick it up, it'll be rubbery. So most bones in most animals are very stiff. They're mostly mineral, heavily mineralized. But in bats, most of the skeleton is like that as well. But the wing tips are actually flexible, and the bone itself will bend. So that recurve is being formed by the actual bone bending, not the joint. So that's something you can play with as well. Bones themselves can be flexible, particularly if they're long and thin and not super mineralized. So you can think a little bit about what parts of your animal skeleton need to be stiff and which parts need to be flexible. In this case, for example, the stiffest part of the skeleton in this thing is going to be the jaws, because that's high biting loads, and the sternum, that big sternum where the flight muscles are. Those need to be stiff because those are rubbery. They're going to get bent around all the time where all these muscles pull on them. But the wingtip would be really rubbery and bendy, so it gives you a combination.
The tip bent in a way by this decision by the animal itself? Because looking at that, I would think it would take it off a little bit lower.
So it can bend either way. I think this is sort of cruising flight, but right after it took off, yeah, it can actually bend. It can bend the other way. Now it can do that in part by muscles pulling on it within the wing. It can also do that passively from just inertia of the wing. So when bats actually do a really fast upstroke, sometimes the wing will actually kind of flip inside out, which is cool because it actually reverses the camber, the curvature of the wing, so they still get a little bit of thrust on the upstroke too, which is pretty cool. So they can do the umbrella thing, basically flip it back and forth. So yes, absolutely, it does bend both ways. It'll spend most of its time in a recurve, but it can procurve too, temporarily during like the reversal of a half stroke.
Is there any evidence for these flexible bones and pterosaur wings?
Yes, there is. As was published by myself and David Hone and Matt Van Rogen in 2016. The only paper on it, as far as I know, that shows that, but we had dozens of others. Of all the things I've published, that might be the best. You should really see it. You can't see it directly, of course, in the material fossilized, but you can see the curvature. Basically, the curvature that's observed with the random species. Doesn't make any sense to that. It makes total sense in this question. But you're not going to see in fossil bats. I know for sure.
I've been like talking to Mark a whole bunch about this stuff, and so I want to pick your brain about like there's a certain folding position of brackets that I've seen a lot, and then it's opposite in like pterodactylus, and so talking about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that for sure. Yeah, Mark and I like talking about those things as well.
Yeah. Pretty good.
Excellent.
And yours also, what they do, remember with pterodactyl wings is that they're not translucent.
Yes.
They're actually quite big.
Yeah, so pterosaur wings would probably be thicker and more opaque than a bat wing. There are multiple reasons for this. Part of how we know this is just from the preservation of the wings themselves. There's a lot of muscle in them. We know that from cases where the wings have been preserved in specimens, which happens sometimes. But also, we can sort of calculate that as a necessity for flight to work in pterosaurs because they're stretching the wing membrane from a single giant finger as opposed to stretching between multiple. So the bats can get away with a thinner wing because they're stretching it between 4 fingers. That makes it easier to tension, and into the body and hind limb. But in a pterosaur, it's just using one giant 4th finger as the finger portion suspending the wing, and so it doesn't have these other spars going through it. And the only way to make that basically work is if the wing membrane itself is comparatively stiffer, and it looks like it had a lot of muscle in it and was keratinized. So it would actually have a pretty thick keratinized skin on it, like the palm of your hand, or maybe even thicker than that. So that's sort of what you're looking at a pterosaur wing. So a bat wing is a little different, a little thinner. Not all membrane wings are exactly the same, but you can get an idea for how thin it can be based on how many supports you give it. Give it fewer supports, it's got to be thicker, it's got to be more muscular on its own. If you're going to put more supports in it, it can be thinner and more translucent, and doesn't need as many supports within the membrane because it's got more bonus supports running through it, which is kind of fun. Yeah, if you want to imagine yourself as a pterosaur, by the way, quick kind of fun way of doing this. They only have 4 fingers up here, at least most of them. No 5th finger, so you lose your pinky finger. I hope wasn't your favorite. Digits 1, 2, and 3 would be normal size. The claws on them. That's when you walk on the ground when your wing is folded. But when you're in the air, you unfold a giant 4th finger. The pterosaur, that 4th finger is about as large around as your wrist and about as long as your entire lower limb. Okay. So if you're going to get engaged as a pterosaur, be ready for the investment.
Drawing, sketching in some of those wing muscles about, and they're pronounced out what those are.
There's a bunch of them, yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of these shapes like that. And then there's blood vessels too, that you can see in bat wings that feed the wing.
So yeah, so he's adding some of the vasculature and muscle fibers in there now, which you can see in about more translucent, which is kind of a cool thing about having a thinner, more translucent wing with more fingers in it, is that you can see more going on in the wing. A pterosaur wing, probably penguins and no cage, you can actually see that much inside, depending on what kind of look you want. Interestingly enough, also in terms of the orientation of the hand, so bats are flying sort of palm down, or more or less, so it's basically the way you kind of do it, although the thumb is not as rotated as ours, so it's not coming back, it's a little bit more out and down as well, it's sort of palm down. But pterosaurs are not flying that way, nor are birds. Pterosaurs are birds that fly palm forward. Yeah. So pterosaurs actually fold the wing by hyperextending the 4th digit, and they open the wing by flexing, extending the flexor side. That actually makes some sense, as it turns out, mechanically and anatomically, because that means they're using the larger flexor muscles to open the wing, which is when you need more speed. And they're using the smaller set of extensor muscles to fold it, which is doesn't have to be as fast. So when they open that wing in the top of the first, they punch off, they come up, they got to open the wing really quickly. They're using these guys, what are gripping muscles, which are some of the strongest muscles in a vertebrate forelimb, to open the wing. So they can really kick that thing open fast. Super cool. Birds are actually flying palm forward technically as well. Now that doesn't matter too much for like what the wing looks like in a bird in terms of overall design and such, although it does matter a little bit in terms of understanding where the protoplasm connects and the orientation of the muscles. But where it really matters is if you're doing something that's inspired by, say, an early bird or one of these non-bird flyers that still has claws. The claws do not bend down towards the ground, they bend forward, they curve forward out of the wing. Right, so if I was a Microraptor or something like that, or Gaptrix, my claws bend like this. So the bats are actually the only ones that actually fall down. So they're not typical in that way. They're actually mammals in general just do everything the weird way. It's one of those funny things you start learning comparative anatomy. Since we're mammals and a lot of the designs that we focus on tend to be mammals, you focus on the mammalian anatomy as people know, but actually we're learning the weirdest anatomy there is in the mammalian anatomy. Everything else does it differently. Mammals always pick the weird option. Like we don't even hear the way that we've got 2 bones from our jaw, they're sitting in our ear instead as our ear bones, and then our jaw connects directly to our brain case. That's just wacky. Like that's like a snake would look at it and be like, that's gross, dude. That's
I think mammals are the only ones that really have 2 gluteal muscles.
Yeah.
Like birds, skeletons, and lizards. I actually one time gave lizards some glutes.
Give lizards some glutes, yeah. They don't normally have much in the way of gluteal muscles. So we got gluteal muscles. We don't have belly ribs, we just have the one rib that comes around, so we don't have the hinged thorax like most vertebrates. We're just weird. Mammals are just strange. Wonderfully strange, beautifully strange, fascinatingly strange, but strange. And it's just good to remember that we are weird, and we should be wonderfully weird. We should be happy to be weird. but we are weird. So, so when you open up a lizard, or you open up a snake, or you open up anything that's not a mammal, basically, and take a look inside, you're going to find it's very different in a lot of ways. But then when you go to something else non-mammalian, it's going to be weird in the same ways, because we're the weird ones.
For this huge beast here, what would it sound like?
That's a great question. Yeah, we were talking about that earlier when I was still echolocal.
Yeah,
red-tailed hawk. Yeah, and you know,
Oh, like everything.
you can have fun with it. There's a couple different ways you can go with it. It could still be an echolocator, but the pitch would probably be much lower than for a small bat, so it might be audible. So we were talking earlier about it being an echolocator because it hunts such big things. It doesn't need a super high frequency, and it's too big to produce that anyway. So it's this really high-pitched, horrible screech that's using, and you can actually hear, and you can imagine, but it's hard to localize because it's still high frequency, and so it just sounds like it's coming from everywhere, and you don't know what's going on, which would be creepy and terrifying and awesome. It could be that it's not echolocating. We could change it up because we want to make it. We figure at this size, it's not going to echolocate. Maybe it makes just more like bird and hawk style sounds, and then maybe enlarge the eyes and shrink the ears and make it more visually based. We can do that instead. Terrell's gone for a reconstruction here where the eyes are still relatively small and it's still got a big ear section because that's what I did with the skull when I did the sketch. So this is probably still an echolocating animal, but it might be a comparatively low frequency echolocator, which for us would be audible instead of being ultrasonic. There are actually some living bats that just barely dip into the range that we can hear with their calls. Some of the molosses that fly in really open habitats where they want to get a lot of range and don't need a lot of resolution because if they see anything at all, it's weird. You just hear intermittently. They're making sound constantly, and most of it's still ultrasonic first, but occasionally they'll dip down and you'll see the canyon squeak up there, so you just hear this little bit. You can imagine if it's all in that range, it would just be really, really terrible, high-pitched thing. Yeah, like a red-tailed hawk, but I feel like rainy and awful. Anyway, just play with it, have fun. Yeah.
Well, you could have, like say it was like a social thing like bats or whatever, and it would have if it was echolocating, it would have its food sounding thing. But would it do something like say for like mating calls or rituals? Yeah, like would it have like rituals likely, or could it make a sound?
Like the raptors did on sort of barking sound.
Something, yeah. If it had to communicate, that was like for a non-food thing,
Living bats squeak back and forth to each other. It's actually very cute. So yeah, any of that would be possible. That's all perfectly great biology. You can perform the creature design, make tell about a story. All that could work. I'll tell you actually something fun that living vampires do that can make this thing extra horrible and gross and wonderful all at the same time. So they have to feed pretty regularly, the high metabolism animals, and sometimes one of them hasn't been able to find a good source of food for a couple of nights and starving, and it comes back to the colony, its neighbor will cough up some blood, some half-digested blood to it to save it, so they'll actually share blood. So can you imagine these things doing it, but it's like a gallon at a time, because the thing's got a 3-meter head, oh, I'm sorry, you haven't, squeaky, squeaky, squeak, are you okay? No, I'm not okay, squeak, squeak back, gallon of blood goes, oh, thanks, I feel so much better now.
Flesh too.
And the bits of flesh would come up as well from this thing, yeah. And the fun thing is they remember. So this has been shown in living vampire bats. They remember who's coughed up blood to them before, and they will preferentially cough up blood to that individual to reciprocate. So they remember they reciprocate.
Do you know if like the dinosaurs, what kind of vocalizations or displays? I mean, is there anything that they can tell what has this? It must have made that kind of noise.
So it's tough. It can be kind of tough. Birds and bird-like things are particularly weird, actually. We use a lot of bird-like sounds or even just bird sounds for flying animals in film. Like that's just a very common source. But actually, birds have a unique sound production device and can make a lot of different sounds that other animals can't make. Birds actually don't vocalize with their larynx. The same thing we use for our vocalization. They have something called a syrinx, which is sitting at the bifurcation of the airway as it goes to the lungs. And if you're curious about that, if you'd like a nice, fairly easy and fairly short review read on the evolution of the syrinx and what's thought about like what early birds and non-bird dinosaurs may have done in terms of sound, I actually published a paper on that, and it's PLOS Biology, which is open access, fully open access, fully open source. So you can go and you can, it's if you have a browser, you can read it. I'm sorry. It was in Pulse Biology. It's on the evolution of the syrinx, SYRINX, the sound production structure there. So yes, if you're looking at stuff on how birds make sound, you want to be looking for information on the syrinx. Yeah, like I said, there's lots of papers on it. I wrote one kind of review about the latest thinking on it, based in part of the fossil record and Pulse Biology. It came out beginning of this year, actually. It's accepted 2018, but I think by the time it hit, it's 2019 gates. It's like January 2019.
So could one of your creatures have, would it be able to say have two separate vocalization organs, one for communicating or mating calls or whatever they do, and then one specifically for echolocation?
Yeah, it probably could. And actually, to a certain extent, bats can already do that because some of them are laryngeal-based mouth echolocators, but a lot of them are nasal locators. They actually emit the sound through their nose. That's still somewhat laryngeal, but they're also using vibrations.
Or whatever.
They're also using vibrations, around the palate and the nasal passages. And that's one of the reasons, or actually the primary reason why some guys have these crazy nose leaves, where they have all this weird soft tissue around their nose. That's because they're emitting the echolocation call through the nose, and it's helping to focus and actually pitch that call. So you can imagine that using part of their head is like the echolocation system, maybe it's a nasal echolocator. This Modus is anyway, actually. And then their typical sort of oral emission, laryngeal dominated stuff could be what they use to just communicate on a daily basis. So yes, there are different ways of splitting that, or you can even go really weird and go with what we think might have been happening in the earliest birds or near bird dinosaurs, where they're evolving a syrinx, but they still have a sound functional larynx, in which case they would have had two voice boxes. So there would have been a little bit of period of time.
Has it actually been done? And okay.
So we don't have a direct fossil example of that. We can infer it from the fossil stuff we do have. So that one's inferred, but hey, it works.
Your comments about the show.
But yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Your comments about the show GI tract and the previous kidneys is very interesting. Will you talk about some of the anatomy of these animals?
Sure, actually, yeah. So it tells about that a little bit. Not, it's mostly directly flight related stuff, but it does have some of that as well. So I've got a whole section on bats. I'll talk a little bit about that, and then this creature will be in there as well. So we'll talk about that with them. In terms of the internal anatomy stuff is in there as well, or it's particularly relevant to the ecology. They can link it to the story behind the creature. The way it's organized, it's gone through a couple of reorganizations, but I think we're sticking with the one we got now. We like it. It's getting pretty near final at this point. Basically, I've got a lead-off chapter where it kind of describes the basic principles of flight. Like these are the rules of flight. These are the things that they have to do, and this is how they have to do it. And this is where you can fudge it a little bit. And this is where you can't, kind of thing. And then we do each of the major groups of flying vertebrates, and in the order they appear in the fossil record. So pterosaurs come up first because they're the first vertebrate flyers, and I start by setting the scene of imagining you're in the time period of the first pterosaurs, and this is what they would feel like, and this is what it would look like, and you'd be kind of gasping for breath a little bit because the oxygen levels are actually on the low side, and things like that. And then we move to the earliest birds. They're sitting on a tropical island, but actually it's southern Germany because Europe is an archipelago in the late Jurassic, so there's a beautiful lagoon. It looks like you should have a resort there. Then you're surrounded by Archaeopteryx. And then we go to bats, and we're picking up bats. We're taking a little note there from genetics. The molecular clocks indicate that the first bats may predate the first fossils of them, and actually might be from right around the time of the Cretaceous extinction that killed all the non-bird dinosaurs. So we're kind of pitching, you're taking your time machine out to a post-apocalyptic world, and one of the survivors are the first bats. But then the later sections will be more about creature design specifically, and they will include some of these kinds of tips about sort of the weird quirks and details of how these things make a living as a miniature. I know you had a question.
Just out of curiosity, do you think this creature would difference between the genders, like peacocks or birds of paradise, or any females in the nose?
It certainly could. So the external appearance of it is largely bat-based, of course. It's largely based on Desmos rotundus, the common vampire bat, and they do not have visually detectable differences between the sexes other than the genitalia. But there's no reason that we couldn't work that in, right? Blend that in. We have a lot of evidence, of course, a lot of birds do. A lot of birds have differences between the sexes that are very, very visually apparent. And we have very good evidence that a lot of pterosaurs did too. That the largest crested, most robust ones were probably male. The smaller crested ones were likely female, or maybe vice versa, but one was one sex, one was the other. And that the juveniles were relatively uncrested and more androgynous, just like juveniles are in humans, for example. And then they, they grew into one of the two morphs later. So that could definitely, you could definitely work that in. You could have different coat colors, different size, and how robust they are. Maybe one of the sexes has more conflict within that sex. Like maybe the males fight over the favor of their blood guzzling female colleague, and and so they have bigger thumb claws to fight with or something. You can do all kinds of things.
So a lot of fantasy creature design has like tears and sort of wings. How plausible is that for actual life?
So within some narrow bounds, it actually works fine. So the question was about putting tears and holes in membrane wings, gives it kind of that cool, gnarly, beat-up look. But how plausible is that for flight? You can put a fair number of holes in there, and they can actually still stay up. Interestingly enough, if they're smaller, you can put more holes in them than if they're larger. Partly because of the forces, the tensioning forces on them, but also partly because that hole is not actually empty, right? It's filled with air. And air itself can complete a surface. We call it a virtual air mass. So actually, when insects beat their wings, for example, okay, have you ever heard the old myth about, bumblebees can't fly according to aerodynamics? Basically that. Okay. And that's not true, by the way. The math works out just fine. You can't apply the same steady state dynamics that we use for 747s to a bumblebee. In that case, no, it can't fly. It can't fly like a 747, but it can fly, and of course does fly just fine. And there's a few different reasons why it flies just fine. One of them is that the wing is actually bigger than it looks functionally. Because at these small sizes where they're moving, moving at relatively low speeds, it looks fast to us because it's a little guy, but it's not that fast. The air feels sticky. So you got those wings moving really fast, but at a very small scale, so it's very sticky. So a lot of air actually sticks to the wing. If you look at the contour of an insect wing, they're like all zigzagged and weird, and not smooth and streamlined and pretty like a bird wing. But it is smooth and perfect and streamlined in flight because what's filling that in is globs of air that it's catching as it goes, and the air that it's hitting is sliding over the air. Because it feels so thick and viscous to them, the air doesn't mix with the other air that quickly. It slides over before it has a chance to mix in. So they've got all these wedges and gaps and everything, and it just slides right over. So on small things, you can put a bunch of holes in there actually, and the air will just slide right over anyway. When it gets bigger, it still works, but a little less so. It's more likely that it can punch through. The real problem that you may have when you put too many holes and tears in the wing is weakening of the structure. So to take a favorite example had some of my work was partly involved. So we take the Game of Thrones dragons, for example. We've got Viserion after his partial resurrection, if you will, zombie resurrection. They put all the holes in there to make it look really cool. And I think that really sold that idea. It's undead, which was a fantastic creature design. But realistically, that would not stay near, and the reasons that size, they're putting so much force in the wing just to keep it tension that they would just catastrophically fail. You put that many holes in it, it would just rip itself apart, regardless of any aerodynamic issues. So the wing has to be strong enough to sustain the damage. And real wings can sustain some damage, but they have limits.
If there was like some damage within the wings, but enough for flight, would it affect their flight patterns in an interesting way?
Yes, it could. If you're getting up to the limit where they can still stay in the air, but it's starting to get a little tough, you might have to work a little bit harder. So they might prefer slightly deeper wing strokes or a little faster wing frequency. You could maybe show the animal working at it a little bit. If it's taking some damage and it has to. Just think of how any other animal, including yourself, shows more effort, right? Think about ways of emoting the extra exertion that would essentially be the killing. Right? That's got to kind of dig deep to get it.
This might have been addressed earlier. Sorry.
No worries, it's fine.
Bats and pteranodons, they all have arming members that go down to their legs. But so often in creatures you see, the dragons having their wet membranes cut straight to their armpits.
Right.
Is that possible? Does it make any sense?
Cool. So the question was whether having the membranes going to the hind limb, like in pterosaurs and bats, versus just coming straight in here. They both work. Keep in mind, that's what a bird basically does, right? So you're basically doing a membrane wing in the shape of a bird wing. So that's actually fine. Aerodynamically, having that fillet that along the side of the body, down to the hind limb, you see in pterosaurs and bats, doesn't do much. That bit of wing in there, that actually it's super stretchy, so it flutters for a bit in flight. It doesn't actually do much in terms of lift. What it's mostly doing is giving an additional anchor point to the wing, which gives you the ability to tension the wing partly with the hind limb, rather than having to do all with the forelimb. So as long as you can get enough tension in the wing with the forelimb, going right into the axilla, right into the armpit, or right into the side of the body, or somewhere, thigh, or whatever, that will work fine. The advantage of having it go down sort of to the thigh, or chin, or ankle is that you can yank on the wing with your legs, which allows you to change the curvature of the wing and also add some tension on the wing so you don't have to do it all up front.
So you're telling me I had an ill-placed pending?
Not necessarily ill-placed because tension is important, and I'm not convinced that all of those dragon membranes were tension problem. But maybe it's not as bad as you thought.
So I can hang out with it.
A little bit. There you go.
So if you had the, the cutaway membrane, like a bird wing, and you had, like, say, some lateral, spikes or something that were lightweight, would those also grab the air and act as a lift? Like, it comes through here and the wing stops, but you have, like, say, little things. Does that do anything or nothing?
It could do something. I mean, you have to think about the context of the whole animal, whether they, how they fold away, how they they impede movement, all the things. All things you know anything about any good creature design. But basically, in terms of being able to create a lifting surface, anything that's relatively broad and has a sharp trailing edge, if you pull it through the air fast enough, it'll produce lift.
Okay,
so it may not be a great lifting surface, but it'll do it.
It would have a function of some sort, not just like pretty decorative, scary-looking spikes. If they were the right spikes, they could actually be visually interesting, but still provide some kind of aerodynamic.
Very possibly. The faster you go, the more a little surface can do. So if you get almost any surface going fast enough, it'll fly. I can make a barn door fly if I hook it to the back of the car and get it going fast enough. Okay. And there's a couple different reasons for that, but not to get bogged down into too much algebra, but the amount of lift you get off a wing is proportional to the amount of air you have in that wing. Okay? It's directly proportional to how dense the air is, but it's also proportional to the square of the speed. So if you get enough speed going, nothing else matters. It can have its shape can be really suboptimal. It'll still produce a ton of lift because it's going super fast.
Which is bicycle.
Which is why rockets have tiny little stabilizing surfaces on them, right? They have little wings on them for stabilization purposes, and they're really little because that thing is going hella fast, and that's all they need. If you put any more on that, it's going to rip itself off because there's too much lift. So if it's a fast-moving thing, if it's fast-moving, streamline matters more, but small lift surfaces do more. If it's slow-moving, streamline matters less. The air feels thicker, but kind of a spike or less optimal lifting surface won't do much. It's kind of either a really good wing or it just isn't. So it depends a little bit on the scale that you're working with in terms of how it works. Insects can get away, design little things, some of the big things today, but design little things too. Insects can get away with all these long antennae and these really unstreamlined body shapes. They can kind of hang their body low as they fly. It doesn't matter because those speeds, the way the air flows around them, is so sticky and everything anyway. They don't care about streamline. It doesn't make much of a difference. And actually, if you get to those small insects, tiny little gnats, you notice how they look at they're bouncing to the air? That's because they're swimming. They're not flying. They're paddling through and just turning around randomly in the air because they don't care about the orientation at all. Because if they stop flapping, they just slowly sink. They don't even fall. They're just sinking through a molasses, basically. So they'll just kind of be like, and that's why they like them just bouncing around. And that's why they're so hard to swat. And when you go in to swat them, you're pushing them away because to them, the air feels thick. That's why you can't hit the darn things. You go in there, and you're just pushing it away from you. I will give you another slightly aggressive thing about swatting insects, by the way. Remember I said everything jumps to launch? That's true even for insects. They jump to launch. So you see people that come, the flies here, and they try to come in like this, it's just going to jump away. You just come over top of it because it jumps into your hand. And if you get really good at that and you're feeling really fancy for your friends, you can grab it without hurting it when it does that and reveal that you caught it, which is one of my favorite tricks. And just let it launch right to my palm. Oh look, I have a fly.
I was told that when you swat them, you're supposed to swat them from like behind or the back because they fly up.
Yeah, because they're going to come. They jump and they're basically ballistic from them. They have no control for that brief fraction of a second right after they've jumped. They're going to go wherever they go, just like if you jump, right? Like if I go to jump over someone here in the front row, I won't do that. But okay, and suddenly there's a trap door on the other side. Once I'm halfway in the air, it doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm like, oh, that sucks. That's where I'm going. I can't change my trajectory now.
On the topic of insects, giant dragonflies, those things.
Yeah.
And
They were a
how
real
does
thing.
that work? Because you said like the ripples in the wings were to make another air surface.
Right.
They would fill it in. But at that size, would that happen?
Not as much. So their wings were probably actually smoother.
Okay.
So the giant dragonflies from the late Paleozoic, which were a real thing, super scary, wingspans like this, could eat your face, super cool. Those things probably had smoother wing contours. It probably would look more like a cross section of a bird wing because of the size. Because they would go in and they could only let a little bit of fill in. And their flapping rates, of course, would be slower as well. So they're not actually, they would be flying. They would be the anatomy of an insect, but they have the flight gait more like of a bird. Although somewhere in between, there was a fairly high atmospheric density at the time as well. So they've got high oxygen levels in particular, which helps fuel their metabolism, but also changes the flight stroke a little bit. Anyway, weird stuff. Super weird stuff. But yeah, actually, that's another. I mean, you can start thinking about this. The world's weird. You get all kinds of interesting things, right? So you can imagine a world, for example, where gravity is low and the atmosphere is thick, and all the flying animals can be really huge because they got high density and low gravity to fight against. And your terrestrial animals can be really big because it makes it easier to push themselves through this high air density, and they get the low gravity. But the funny thing is the aquatic animals wouldn't change that much because the buoyant force is proportional to the gravitational force. So when you drop gravity, you also drop buoyant force. So low gravity worlds don't get big aquatic animals. Or really big aquatic animals. In fact, you can very easily imagine a world in which the terrestrial animals might be bigger than the biggest aquatic animals if the gravity is low. As it is on Earth, the largest. So I work a lot of flying things and swimming things, but another one of my specialties is just big things. So in fact, that's what I'm excavating, or my team's excavating right now in New Mexico. We've got two of the largest dinosaurs ever walk in North America. My students nicknamed them Daisy and Duke. I don't know exactly how that happened. I'm assuming it was a reference to one of the wardrobe choices that one of the students had made. But I don't want to go there because it's unfortunate. I warned them that they really should stay more covered in the desert of New Mexico, and she didn't, and there was a lot of sunburning, and I think they were teasing her about that. But anyway, I don't really know. I just came back to the quarry from doing an expedition, the prospecting run at one point, and to find out they were referring to the two animals with Daisy and Duke. But anyway, they're giant long dinosaurs. They're sauropods or titanosaurs. One cervical vertebra would be about half the length of this table. They've got 14 of those, and that's the mid-cervicals. And then the base of the one at the base, you put it on the floor. The spinous process is about 70 tons, 100 feet long, giant things. These were whale-sized animals walking around on land. So in fact, if you now look at what's known from fossil record and modern, and you plot out the biggest animals we know of, blue whale still at the top by a good margin. Fin whale is next, but it's about tied with the largest titanosaurs, and then there's a bunch of titanosaurs, and then more baleen wings. So like the overlap is actually significant now. Like if we didn't have blue whales, it would be basically a dead heat between aquatic animals and terrestrial animals for the largest animals to ever live on Earth. And the reason is probably that it turns out weight support is not the limiting factor. The limiting factor is probably how much you can pump blood and how fast your nerves can operate and things like that. So your cardiovascular system becomes a real issue if you're 150 feet long, and things like that. But yeah, weird things happen when you start to mess with atmospheres and gravities and things like that. But less happens in the aquatic world than you think, because your buoyancy is just dependent on how dense you are and how dense the fluid is. It doesn't care what gravity is.
Another quick question.
Yeah.
Those green like fig beetles, how are they flying? Could an animal or a mammal base or other flying thing actually mimic that, or is that going to be unique to that type of insect? They kind of buzz, but they're really slow. They're really very slow. Bottom heavy. They just kind of like stumble along at about 6 feet in the air.
Yeah, they're not good flyers, but they fly. And being able to fly at all is a big difference between not flying and not flying. Yeah, for sure. They're pushing the limit of what their particular anatomy can do in terms of flight, and that's why they're so clunky. They're slow to take off, they're slow in flight. But they're a big armored clunky beetle with low streamlining, and that's one of the reasons why they're flying that way. Now, the limiting factor on insect size turns out not to be turns out to be basically oxygen rather than mechanical. So the way they breathe, they inject oxygen directly into tubes into their tissues. As they get bigger and bigger, what ends up happening is you need bigger and bigger tubes, but you're competing with volume for all the other parts of your body. And at some point, your respiratory system competes with your muscular system, and you can't get any bigger. But that's just in terms of them just surviving at large sizes. Flying at large sizes is a whole other thing. So if you're going to scale them up big, let's say there wasn't enough oxygen for them to scale bigger, you might need to drop some of the armor or something like that. They give them a more flight optimized shape, right? So flies and bees have a much more flight optimized shape than the beetles do, even though the beetles are ironically bigger. But that also means that
for the winged mammals type of things, they'll be flying along, bumbling. If you could adjust the
maybe. Yeah, you could have. I mean, there are some birds that are not the most elegant long-range flyers. Yeah, you can have marginal. Not everything has to be optimal at it, right? Every flying creature you make doesn't have to be like the best flying thing to ever take to the air. It can be kind of awful at it, but if you can fly, you can still fly, right? You can still get places, that can affect like from a world building standpoint or how your creature interacts with that world too. You can have flying animals that are still isolated, right? Like there are I don't know if you guys are familiar with Catalina Island, or the Channel Islands. Catalina Island being the only one that has a permanent human settlement on it. It's Avalon and two harbors. And there are quail that live only in Catalina Island. Now they fly just like normal quail do. They got brought over or somehow ended up over there at one point, and they're isolated there now. They can't get back to the mainland, and the mainland ones can't get to them because it's a 22-mile crossing, and a quail can't fly 22 miles. Can't even fly a fraction of that. If it hits the water, it will drown and die because they can't water. So they're stuck there. No, they can still fly away from you on the island, but they are still isolated to the island, and they actually are a little different from the mainland ones now. They're all smaller size and slightly different proportions, and give them a couple million years, and they'll probably be their own thing that's totally different from the mainland ones. And they might still be flight capable because they use that to get away from predators on the island, but they can't soar gracefully over the ocean to get back to the mainland. So you can still have flying animals that are short-ranged escape specialists that are isolated in their place. They only live in that one place. And if that's part of your story, like we want this thing to fly, but it has to only live in this one place. It's never left this valley. Whatever, because that, the heroes find it there, and it's only lives. Well, if it flies, why did it get out of the valley? Well, maybe it can't fly that high or that far.
Yeah. So you have a little bit more leeway in design because it doesn't have to be a good flyer. It just has to be a.
Yeah. Okay. And what constitutes a good flyer is actually kind of an interesting game too, because I would argue that a grouse or a quail is an excellent flyer. But it only does the front end of it well. It launches like a rocket and it sprints really well, and then it gets tired and it stops. It can't fly far. I mean, saying that that's a bad flyer is like saying Usain Bolt's a bad runner.
Or saying that a cheetah's a bad runner.
Or saying a cheetah's a bad runner, right? Yeah. In fact, we tend to celebrate the sprinters when it comes to land locomotion. So, the sprinters for flight could be isolated into a particular valley, a particular mountaintop, or a particular island, what have you, and I would still say they could still be a good flyer, or maybe not. Maybe it could even be marginal. There are some island rails, for example, that barely fly. They're not good at. They're not rockets like a quail.
Birds.
Yeah.